Okay, better. Thank you, guys. Okay, so again, guys, you have homework. The homework is going to appear on Canvas, used at the end of the lecture, and is due before the next lecture. So homework. Second, concepts. The homework is about this concept that we cover, and we're going to continue working today. Requirements. It's a very easy thing to kind of forget that every single time that I ask you if something is a requirement or not, I am asking you the questions about the invest. It is not, okay. It is not just about yes or no, randomly 50-50. The question is really about thinking about this independent, negotiable, valuable, and so on. Every time that you have this question about if something is a requirement or not, or in your homework that I am going to ask you about requirements, review the elements of the invest very carefully. Second, after you review the invest, the next thing to do is about, well, is a requirement good? Is going to be functional or not? And the main reason, because I am asking you to identify one or the other, I mentioned this before. Functional requirements are going to be the work of one person in your team. Someone is going to develop that functionality. Non-functional requirements, they are going to be the responsibility of the full team in a very particular way that we need to review. This is all about the estimation of the project. Identify what kind of requirement it is. It's all about, is one person, is the team, and what can go wrong with one person, what can go wrong with the full team. We're going to go into the details of that when we review planning, but that is the reason because I am spending these 2 lectures talking about these particular concepts. Moreover, the reason because we're going to review today examples, and I am going to ask you to provide your own examples in a homework. It's very important to understand this in detail. Now, moving forward, hopefully you memorize or you remember these letters. You're going to be working with them the full semester. So familiarize yourself with the meaning of these things. We're going to work with them today, don't worry. And I am going to point out the most important for every single case. So we are going to continue with this. Now, previous lecture, I start with this difference between functional and non-functional. In particular, I start with this definition. If a requirement is going to be functional, it's going to be one of 3 things. Red color in the slide, remember? Something very important to understand. It's going to be a service, it's going to be a behavior, or it's going to be a functionality. Just avoid to repeat functionality and functional. It's going to be a reaction of the system. It's going to be what the system is going to do when you trigger that action. You click one element on the screen, and the system is going to react doing something. When you're talking about that, that is a functionality, a functional requirement, a functional behavior, or a service that you're getting. Full definitions there, but 3 words to remember. If you tell me that something is functional requirement, if I ask you for examples of functional requirements, whatever you put there is one of these 3 things. Done. No other ideas. Examples. Your help. I have here this sentence. Let's start with the first one. We haven't told yet about a particular way to put the requirement, a particular notation, or a particular language, or model, or template. So far I am talking about these ideas that come from the customer. If I am your customer, if I ask you for the option A, you know what? You are the developers. Help me to build a system. And that system is going to search option given to the user to search from various invoices. If you read that, question number 1 is a requirement. Yes, no, but in order to select one or the other, invest. Independency, negotiable, value, estimation, testing, and small. Could you say, oh, make sense? Could be. Any issue with any of the letters? And hopefully you say, no, it's asking for very specific thing, right? A searching functionality, a searching service, right? What is the system about? What is the context? Could be very, very important for the documentation, but so far, if I read that line, it's like, this looks like a functional requirement. Is a requirement? Yes. Is functional? Yes. It's about searching something in a system. I need more information about what is the invoices. Yeah, maybe, but remember, it's just one line. That one line, I can move forward. Clear? What about the second one? Yes.
I was going to ask, did you ever answer wrong because we thought it was a non-functional requirement? It really is just a functional, or vice versa?
It is going to be possible to miss them. Obviously, my goal is to teach you how to identify them and how to avoid that. So the goal for today is exactly that. Give you the elements, the things that you need to review to avoid confusing one with the other. So your goal. The previous lecture was all about identifying that something was a requirement or not. Today, I want to focus on that. Be sure that something is functional or not. I am starting with something that is very simple. I mean, the first letter that I show you is obviously a functional, and there is nothing there that suggests other things. A, good. B, it's a functionality, a reaction, a service, sending an email. And hopefully everyone say like, so far, so good. It's a function. It is clear, have a value, can be negotiated. Can you test it? Can you estimate the time that you need in order to implement something like that? Hopefully the answer for everything is, yeah, I mean, it's sending an email. Probably I do not know exactly how many hours do I need, but I am sure that sending an email should be some kind of library. I need to do that research, and then I need to use the particular instruction. I can do it. And it's not going to be 1 year. So it's something that is going to happen in hours, weeks, days. C. Not independent. Let's talk about independency in the V. Very important point. Remember something. You can be thinking like, well, I am going to send an email, and the email is going to be a report. And the first thing to think is, well, I need the report before sending the email, so they are connected. When we talk about independency, having connections is fine. Having connections is okay. We all are connected. The idea is that we are independent. It's more about, can you implement sending an email without having that thing that you are going to send by email? Can you start working in this functionality of sending emails, and later someone is going to tell you, what are you going to send there? And hopefully you agree with me. Yes, I can implement something that sends emails with text, with pictures. And I do not really need to have the text and the picture that I am going to send, but later I can connect these two things. Independency is not about isolation. Independency is the two things can be created, the two things can exist, even though in some point they are going to be connected and one is going to depend on the other. Dependency and independency. Dependency, we are going to work together in some point, but we can live without each other. Students and professors, I am teaching here with you, but I prepare my class without you. Even though right now we are connected, this class exists because you are here and I am here. The class itself was created without you. The class, my teaching, what I am doing right now, my slides are independent from you. Even though right now we're interacting, we're connecting, working together, but they exist without you. And in the same way, you create your schedule without knowing me or my slides or my class. You exist without me. You are independent of me. But right now, we're working together. That is what you need to review, independency. Good? The C. Thinking about divided, I am thinking about Zoom. I need an application that allows me to divide people into groups. And each group is going to have different rights or whatever. Is that a requirement? I am thinking about the working groups in Zoom. Is a requirement? Is a functionality, a service, something that the system, in this case Zoom, give me? I think it's so. Now, we cover the invest. It's independent. And again, the common error is to think about, no, it's not independent because first the user needs to connect to Zoom and then you can create the groups. Not really. I can create the groups and I am going to put inside of the groups the people that is connected. And if there are no people connected, there are not going to be people in the groups. But creating the groups can be done without or with the people. It's a functionality that I can develop that is independent from other things. The value, the estimation, the testing, I think all of that is there. Is it small? Well, so far, I think it's kind of very specific. Create groups. Can we split in 2 or 3 things? So far, not. We're going to review more closely this example, but it looks like could cover the invest. Looks like it's a functionality. Looks like it's a functional requirement. Makes sense? I am sure that you are noticing that the sentences are very short. And I am sure that you're thinking, I can improve that sentence. I can put not only 1 line, but 2 or 3 lines and be more specific, maybe provide some context. I would like you to do that. You can do it. But even if you do not do that, use these words, in particular the one in bold, are giving you the key elements for having a requirement functional. If you can add more elements, if you can surround this with 2 or 3 lines, obviously your requirement is going to be better than mine. This is about business. This is about contract. 1 line like this is not good enough. Probably 2 or 3, they are better. But the key elements, the one in bold, the ones that are there, even though can be improved. What about the D? Yeah.
So you talked about not using requirements. So why wouldn't you want to break up? Like, users can be divided into groups.
Very good point. Guys, something that is going to happen, like when I mentioned the and, there are going to be several ideas, several rules that I am going to mention, but they are not like, oh, there is this word, so this should not be in this way. There is an and, then should we split? When you have the and, what you need to do is, the and is a red flag. The and is a warning. The and is a possibility for a failure. The and is something that should be reviewed twice, right? It is not like, here is an error done. No, it's a red flag. Think twice this sentence. Now, that particular one. What we need to focus is, when we have the and, it is the case that I am talking about a service here and another service here. It is the case that maybe the full thing here is not independent enough, because these 2 things are kind of connected but should not be connected. It is the case that I am talking about 2 things instead of splitting that in 1 and 1. That was my example in the previous lecture. Those are the questions that you need to ask yourself when you read this and. Most of the time, sometimes the answer is going to be, yes, you have a problem with the dependency. Yes, we can split these two things into requirements, but not always. This example in particular. The problem with the and is with the independency, right? Here. Yes, I have an and. The and is connecting two requirements. And probably the question is, the and is connecting two verbs, two actions, like sending an email and printing something, mailing and printing, two verbs connected with an and. That is a problem. That is not independent. Load information and save information, two verbs. They are not independent, need to be good. In this example, how many verbs? And hopefully you notice that the main idea here in terms of action is this here. Divide in groups. And hopefully you notice that the and in this particular scenario is not connecting one verb, divide in groups, and another action. It's connecting this extra information about and the groups should have different rights. It's kind of a complement of the previous one. It's kind of extra information. For this particular thing, I do not have another action, another verb, another thing that I consider a problem. In this particular one, even though I have the and, I could be okay with that being one. The and was a red flag. I check it, second time, pass. And that is the part that I mentioned before, engineering. Because I am not here giving you a recipe. I am giving you all the elements, and you engineers, you like programming. You learn the language, and then you use elements to create your software. Make sense? Yeah. It could be the same still. My main requirement is create the groups. The groups are going to have names. The groups are going to have colors. The group are going to have. It's an option that I am going to give to the group. The key idea here, and I need to talk another thing. Remember that the requirement should be small. Something that I told before in the previous lecture was, okay, if I have something like develop the Pac-Man video game, something that is big, I need to split that big thing in a smaller thing, right? Something that I need to talk today. What if is too small? A requirement cannot be big, cannot be too small. Why not? Because something that is too small is going to have a different name. We're going to talk about it. For instance, I want to send an email. Sending an email, we agree, was a requirement. But then I can say, like, you know what? The system is going to allow me to send an email. And I should be able to put a subject to the email. And I should be able to put the email of the people that I am sending the email. And I should be able to click send to send the email. Did you notice that the requirement itself is sending the email, and all the other things that I am mentioning is kind of things that are inside of sending the email, like particular things that are part of sending the email. So these small things, put the subject, selecting the email from the people that is going to be the destinatory of the email, change the font, the color background, all of that are not requirements. They are going to be called activities. We need to talk about them, but we need to be careful to keep requirements here, not too small, not too big. Put the name to the group, change the color of the group, the rights for the group. If we agree that is something too small, It's not a requirement, it's part of the requirement. Why is an engineering decision? Because you can be thinking, how do I know that is too small? The answer is, think about it. If you need to implement that functionality, how many times do you need to implement that? How many times do you need to put that in a software? You need days or hours? How many times do you need to allow the system to ask for the subject of the email? Hours or days? And it's like, really? You want me to ask for the subject of the email? That basically is to put a text file, period. And maybe a button to send, click send. All those things are part of the graphical user interface, and I can create that graphical user interface in a couple of hours. That is not a requirement. That is an activity. What is the requirement? Sending the email. Sending the email implies to implement that graphical user interface, implies to implement the functionality, the listener for all the elements that I described. That is a requirement, because that is going to take you days or maybe weeks. You need to think about the estimation, days or hours. Better? Professor, that is not like very straightforward, black or white. No, that is your decision process. That is your engineering skills. I am going to decide this or this because my decision is telling if this is easy or not, if I am going to hire one person or two persons, if I am going to spend how many money or resources. That is the point. Clear? Good. The last one. Functionality, reaction, service, functional requirement. Could be, it's a requirement. Invest. Could be. Talking about this small idea, the ghost in the Pac-Man video game, is like too small. And hopefully you agree with me. No, it's not too small. And these guys move in some way that this is smart. And we need to program that smart way for them to move. So it's not something that one person is going to implement. It's something that is going to take days, not hours. So, yeah, it's small, good enough for the requirement, cover the invest, we can move forward. Very good question. Hopefully you notice some elements in my examples. Number one, I mentioned at the beginning, when you have a functionality, when you have a functional requirement, something that you're going to notice always, there are going to be some kind of verb there, the action, the thing that we want to happen in the system. It is a functionality, is it a reaction, is it a service? There are going to be some element in the sentence that suggests that, and usually, commonly, it's going to be a verb. So you notice in my example, there is always a verb there. Second, when we have a verb, you're going to notice that it's very important, it's useful to connect that action with the subject that is going to receive that action, with the subject that is going to create that action. In my examples, I mentioned the user. The user wants to send an email, the user wants to, etc. For the last one, search, the user, mail, the user, divide into groups, the user. The last one, I didn't mention this subject. I didn't mention the subject. It's a good idea to always mention the subject. Something that I am going to do with you later is to share the template that you are going to use to establish requirements, and that template is going to ask you to put the subject. However, in the last one, can you imagine who is the subject? because it's not the user, right? The user is the one moving the Pac-Man, if we think about the game. But the ghost, who is moving the ghost in the game? And you have several names for this. The common one is the system, the computer, the artificial intelligence inside of the box. We're going to talk later about these subjects, the ones that connect with the verb. A name that we're going to use for them later is actor. That particular guy, the one connected with the requirements that are functional, is going to be our actor. And two of the most important actors that we're going to have, that you're going to be using, is the user and the system. Now, think about user and system as, if you know Java, you remember that all the classes in Java have a common parent. Which is the common parent for all the classes in Java? One class, right? The name of the class? Object. Good. You have this common parent, but then from that parent, you specialize the thing that you need. The parents or the common parents for your actors are going to be this user, the human beings, and this system, like the computer. It is not a good idea to use those names. It is not a good idea to use the parents. Why? They are too generic. So, for instance, if we're talking about the Pac-Man video game, instead of thinking about the user, it is better to talk about the player. Professor, it's the same. Yeah, but if you talk the player, you are talking about a user playing the game. Instead of just a user, like a user could be anything. If we're talking about Canvas, you can talk about students or professors. They both are users, yes, but if you told me student, we can focus on the functionality that a student is going to call, or professor, the functionalities that the professor is going to call. Think about this user like the parent of professor and a student. When you put requirements in a document, try to be the most specific possible. And we start with the verbs, obviously, but also with the actors, the subject that you select. So one area of opportunity in all the examples that I show you is to improve the actor, to be more specific about who is the actor. Don't worry, you're going to help me to improve my sentence. Good? Okay, now, when you have a sentence, things to be careful. I already mentioned, thank you for the question, this and, or, not. Be aware that sometimes they are going to be there connecting to verbs and therefore should be split. Sometimes it's not going to be the case. You could keep the and. The second thing that you need to be careful is when you have a sentence, at the sentence have some kind of adjective. Do you remember this? Fast, easy to use, beautiful, and so on. Every time that you have an adjective in a sentence, you need to be careful because two things. Number one, because you want to test things. And sometimes the adjectives like fast or beautiful, they are not clear. They are not negotiable because we do not understand the same, or they could be hard to test. If we do not agree, what are we going to measure with this beautiful or fast? We need to put numbers to them. But the second thing is, usually when you read an adjective, maybe you are facing a requirement that is not functional, but non-functional. In the same way that I am talking with you, like requirements, functional requirements imply verbs, actions. Something that I am going to mention later is adjectives usually imply non-functional requirements. When you have together a verb and an adjective Sometimes what you need to do is to split that in two. The verb is going to continue being functional, and the adjective is going to become a second requirement that is non-functional. I am going to show you examples, but right now I want you to be aware, careful with the adjectives in the sentence. Something could happen with them. Good? I am going to ask you for requirements, functional, or either to create one or to tell me if one is correct or not, just like in my examples. Things that I recommend you to review. If I were you, step number one, start reviewing if whatever is in the sentence is valuable. Valuable. Yeah, is something that the customer wants, yes or no. That sentence there is something that the customer of this system want me to do. If the answer for that is yes, continue. If the answer for that is not, forget. That is not a requirement, even though you want to do it. Okay, that is easy. I put that in black because it's kind of obvious, but step number one, always. The most important ones to decide it is or not. After that, negotiable. Remember, ambiguity. The first thing that you need to ask yourself is if everyone is going to understand with this line the same thing that you are understanding. If you answer for this negotiable, ambiguity allow you to move forward, the next thing that you need to review is independency. And let me be clear, this is going to be very, very connected with small. Why? Because the thing that we reviewed before. You need to be careful that the requirement is small, but not too small. If it's too small, maybe something that is inside of a requirement, but not the requirement itself. And probably the most common error. So red or orange. Okay, is something that the customer wants? Good. It is small, independent, good, not ambiguous, perfect. The last thing is about estimation and testing. If you have the previous things, I am almost sure that the last two are going to pass. You're going to figure out the last two. If you already understand what you're doing and you already were able to check this is negotiable and this is independent, I am sure that you achieve that conclusion because you already identify how to test it or how to do the thing, and therefore the estimation. But still, before telling yes is a requirement, think about those two. Good? Now, with those in mind, tell me, if I ask you for a video game, I mentioned the Pac-Man before, can I ask you 5 requirements of the Pac-Man video game? 5 sentences that are requirements, moreover, functional requirements. You all know the video game, Pac-Man, Tetris, whatever. If I ask you for, I am going to focus on the Pac-Man. If I ask you for 5 requirements for that game, 5 things that you could ask to a group of developers to which you are asking to develop that game. We already mentioned that asking for, I want you to develop the Pac-Man video game is not a requirement because it's not exactly small. Different idea, I want you to embed a Pac-Man video game in the application. I want you to develop. That is not use the requirement to be 5 requirements connected with the Pac-Man. Can you help me? Ideas, functional requirements.
So can you say making a video game as a task that we are dividing into requirements for that?
Yes. If you think about this, develop a video game is what I as a user have as a project, the big picture, the epic that I want to achieve. Your task is, that is too big. What we do with big things, we split and we split into requirements. So my big picture, my epic is I want to develop a Pac-Man video game. What are my requirements? And I am asking you for 5 examples, 5 things that you can say, this is a requirement. Moving the Pac-Man. Can you agree with that? I like the idea. We can put that idea in a more beautiful way, right? 1 paragraph, 2 sentences, or whatever. But the key words, just like the one that I use, moving is a verb. It's a functionality. The Pac-Man should move. I am being specific. We are talking about moving the Pac-Man, not moving the ghost or other things. It's moving the Pac-Man. The question, and my red circle there, is small. I agree that it's functional. I can agree with all the letters of the invest. And the only one that is going to be like, I need to think twice, or I am asking you to think twice, is moving the Pac-Man is small enough, not too small, not too big. It's in this place like between 2 boundaries. Yes or no? Professor, it's too simple. It's not really too simple, because you are thinking about listeners for the keys. You're thinking about drawing the Pac-Man. Moreover, you're thinking about this animation of something doing this. So it is not too complicated, but it is not something that you're going to do in 1 hour. Again, average developer, right? Maybe you are able to do it in 1 hour, but the average is going to take days. Moving the Pac-Man, 1 requirement, functional requirement.
Depending on the developer, small thing.
Think about the average. Moving the Pac-Man, I am thinking about an average developer is something that is going to take days. Days, I am thinking about at least 8 hours, right? So the average developer moving the Pac-Man, I am thinking about the animation is going to be with threads. I am thinking about listeners. I am thinking about the graphic, the colors, some designer is going to be involved. Thinking about all these things around. And obviously you need to think about the testing part. Is not something for a couple of hours. So because it's not something for this couple of hours, I move to it's a requirement. And it's a requirement and maybe something that someone is going to do in 1 day, 2 days. I don't care. But I can ask or I can think about is a requirement. It's good enough for be the work of 1 person at least a couple of days. The average person.
Is
The what?
for Pac-Man.
The maze? That is going to be a second requirement, yes.
Running small. So can we take it as like previous example you were telling us about activities? So can we take it as something that can only be divided into activities small enough?
Yes. I need to talk about that, but that is going to be one of the things that is the next one. Once we have our functional requirement identified, the next step is to specify the activities that are inside of each of those requirements. Because the activities are the ones that are going to help us to estimate the work. Activities are going to become important later with Agile because our product backlog and blah, blah, blah. For the plan base, the only thing that we need is the requirement for the contract. We don't care about the activities, but is the next thing that we're going to do for each requirement, which are the activities. So you can imagine that moving the Pac-Man, what I described is all these activities that are involved. Read the keyword, calculate an exposition, draw the animation, and so on. For the maze, that is another thing that I am considered a requirement. Again, why? Because the maze is not going to be used as simple picture. When we think about the maze, and you explain to me what is the maze in the Pac-Man, is something that is changing, right? So there should be an algorithm there to calculate the walls. So again, it's not something that is going to happen in a couple of hours, but something that we need to think more about it. And there are several graphical elements involved. Couple of days, 1 day or more, a requirement. Drawing the Pac-Man, drawing the maze, moving the Pac-Man, the algorithm for the maze, whatever is the sentence that you put, those are 2 things that are requirements for the particular video game. Yes.
So when we talk about requirements,
Yes. So far, we are not talking about programming language, right? We're not talking about the particular programming language that we're going to use. I am just imagining how I could develop that, and I am thinking maybe in Java. That is the reason because I mentioned these listeners and so on. but it's just how are you going to do it in whatever tool you have. Good? So I asked for 5. So far I have 2, the maze, the Pac-Man, something else.
Taking the basic functional requirement could be making the video game available on the browser.
That is a very good one. The Ghost is another one that is good. So I have the Pac-Man, the Ghost, the maze. Making the video game available in a browser, that is something that, help me, is going to be a functionality or something else? It's tricky, and that is a good one.
Be a function, but it would be a technical requirement to host it properly. Different dynamic aspects about the number of users using the application, number of requests that will be given to the application. So it's something that functional requirement is mostly specific to how the user is interacting with the application. So that is what we need.
Yes, and let me just be specific here. It's a requirement, yes, for sure it's a requirement. However, when we talk about it's going to be in the web browser, or it's going to be in the mobile application, or it's going to be in whatever, we are not talking about a service, about a functionality or a reaction, but we're talking about the Pac-Man moving in the web browser. Yeah, well, we talked before about the Pac-Man moving, but we do not need to specify where. When we talk about where, it's a requirement, it's going to be a non-functional. Why? It's going to be a constraint. It's going to be something about the environment. It's going to be something about where, in which platform, hardware, or whatever, the Pac-Man is going to move, or the maze are going to be drawn. These kind of requirements that are kind of covering something like the platform, the environment, are going to be the ones that are the non-functional, but I need to talk more about it. So it's just, that is a good example for the Pac-Man, for instance, non-functional, if we want a Pac-Man that is web-based or web-oriented.
When the ghost touches the Pac-Man, it deletes the ghost, or I'm saying it all. When the ghost touches Pac-Man is deleted when it's in a certain mode. You're able to eat the ghost.
Let's put a name with that: collision detection. Because there are going to be several different things that could happen depending on if the Pac-Man eats the pill or if the ghost is the one. Details. But in general, something that we want is we want to detect the collision. The collision between the Pac-Man and the ghost, because something is going to happen. I fully agree with that. And then the details, the activities, by the way, the activities can be conditions. It's like, okay, the Pac-Man and the ghost collide, but it's like the Pac-Man eat the ghost or the ghost kill the Pac-Man. And then we can define the consequences. Okay, if the ghost kill the Pac-Man disappears. Or the ghost is the one to disappear, but Pac-Man is eating. Details, activities, requirement, the collision is important. Did you notice that we split the Pac-Man in the maze, the Pac-Man moving, the ghost moving, and now we have this collision as another thing.
When you mention collision detection, you also consider the case when the Pac-Man goes into a wall?
I can include that one also. Or that one is going to.
No, would that be a separate requirement already?
I have 2 options. I can consider that inside, and we need to talk about this, but I can consider that inside of the collision. So I can put collision between the characters and also the walls. It's not a character, but something that is there, or another element. Or I can put this collision detection in the maze. The creation of the maze, and I need to support the maze. The maze exists, so the walls cannot be crossed during the full game. That one is something that I am going to put like a sub requirement. I do not want to go in that direction yet, but something that is a requirement, but can be inside of something else, because it's kind of part of something else, part of the maze itself or part of the collision itself. We're going to have these big requirements, like you can think like the centers of something, and around those are going to be these small requirements that are very connected with this. And then each of them, including this one, is going to have these activities that are what inside we do, step by step, how these things happen. Those are the elements that we want to identify in our system. Think about the system, the requirements, sub-requirements sometimes, and activities. And that is going to be the picture. Good?
I was just in a comment. So would that be considered requirements, not requirements? Because I know that when you have your structures with 5 things, you can put in a certain amount of things additionally as constraints rather than like the requirement.
It is considered a requirement. Yes, it's considered a requirement. We need to show that. Right now, the only thing that I mentioned is later we're going to connect that one with one of the other two. But yes, by default, that one is a requirement. Avoid the wall, make the walls be solid, or avoid the walls be crossed. It's a requirement. Good?
What we can best do is we can categorize the requirements. The control requirements, the architectural requirements, the game control requirements.
We're going to go in that direction. Don't worry. But yes, we're going to need to do that. In some point, the requirements are going to have different classifications, both the functionals and the non-functionals. So far, it's our third lecture. The only thing that I want right now, my only concern so far, is for you to be able to identify the requirements. Later, I can be concerned about what we're going to do with that, including the activities, including the sub-requirements, and including the categorization. Good?
Every functionality of the user.
Yes. The only thing that you need to be careful is sometimes one functionality is not one requirement, but because could be too big, and you need to split that functionality in several things that are going to be requirements. The main thing that you need to be concerned when you look to a verb is, yes, it's a verb, it's going to be a functionality, but you need to think about the size. Too big, you need to cut, because requirements should be small. Good? Again, something that you can do in a few hours is not a requirement, it's an activity. Something that you can do in days or weeks is a requirement. Something that you need months or years is probably something that later we're going to call an epic. Is not a requirement, but something that we can use to extract requirements. Something small.
In context of the Pac-Man game,
What?
context of the Pac-Man game, would requirement, would this be a requirement? Say, game terminates. Not be a requirement.
Help me. Game over. That is the context, right? What is game over?
Whether you win.
Let me put that. It's a very good question. Game over. What could be game over?
Can we merge that requirement?
The what?
Collision detection. Can we merge this?
Yes. I am going to ask you in terms of you are developers, right? Tell me about what are you do to implement game over? As an engineers, you're going to think game over in the low level is an if condition. Because it's basically if, and you can think about the condition, the number of lives, obviously it was a collision, but then you need to check the lives and so on. And in one if, you decide if the game is over or not. Game over is one activity. One activity. All the activities, that if condition, is inside of something. What something? A requirement. Which is the requirement that is going to have that activity, game over, included? You need to put that one inside of a requirement. Right now, if I use the one that you give me, probably I will put that as one activity inside of the requirement of reviewing collision. Because you can imagine that the full requirement is to check the collision. It's the most important thing to happen. And if I detect a condition, then several things could happen. The Pac-Man eat the ghost, or the ghost eat the Pac-Man. And a particular thing to review if the ghost eat the Pac-Man is the lives for the Pac-Man, and therefore if there is game over or not. It's small, it's an activity, not a requirement, but is inside of a requirement. Makes sense? Story. What I am asking you to do is the following. You are writing this book. The requirements are kind of your sections in the book. Should not be the chapters, because chapters are too big. should not be one sentence, because the sentence or the paragraph should belong to a particular section. We are looking for the sections, not for the individual lines, not for the big chapters. We are trying to find these elements here, not here, not below. Good?
Scoring service.
What?
Scoring method. Maintain the score in the impact.
The score, very well, very good question. What about the score? Is a requirement or can be inside of something?
Part of something else, you can define a constructor originally, and it can always be defined in the beginning, but it would be part of the story, of the section, or
It's a point.
So your score increases when you consume food or whatever. Much the scoring thing with that. That would be the requirement instead.
Yes. Did you notice that we start with this idea of the score? And the first question here is, okay, the score is something that should be there. Is something complex or not? And probably the point is, well, it's not complex if we already have somewhere else implemented this idea of the pills, because the pills impact the score, and if we have in some part else implemented the collision. So we need to do that also. Can we call the requirement the score, but be aware that inside of this score calculation is not only the score calculation, but it's also this counting of the pills, or this counting of how many times the collision was between the Pac-Man and the ghost, and the Pac-Man is losing or winning. Can we put this calculate the score name like a title for the chapter? But we are aware that we are talking about several things that are going to happen around. If that is the idea, I will say calculate the score is a requirement, but doing all these things. If you're thinking about calculate the score, you like calculate the score one line, a score equal to a score plus something. That is an activity, not a requirement. So probably my question is going to be, what are we talking about calculating the score? The big one, the small one? We need to be clear.
Score and be part of.
Yep. Think about this. I am talking about the Pac-Man video game, and the only thing that you're doing is to split the work in several different groups. And you're going to put a name to the group. What we need to be clear is that all of those groups that you are putting a name inside should have more than one easy thing to do. And that is the reason, because you need to be clear when you tell me calculate the score or something like that. What are you talking about it? Because next I am going to ask you, tell me about the activities for this requirement. And if your requirement or your activities for calculating the score is just one activity, if you have a requirement and you only point out one activity, that is not a requirement. Never, never, never. One requirement is going to have just one activity as a detail. Think about this. Your requirement is the name of your algorithm. Never, never, never are you going to have one algorithm that have only one instruction. It's not going to happen. It's not correct. It's not related. It's just one specific element inside of the requirement. So the Pac-Man is going to move. That is the requirement. The speed of the move is kind of one variable that are going to be controlling the speed. Something that you select, maybe a state. We're going to talk about the states. Is not a particular requirement. It's just one item, one activity. Declaration of variables, declaration of states is going to be part of the things that we call activities. One line, not requirement. Yep.
Regarding scoring, let's say every time the Pac-Man touches a coin, we just simply add one to a turbo. But in case they are 50 and we run some algorithm to increase our score. That case, algorithm should be a specific requirement, while that collision can be a part of.
All those things that you're describing to me is a requirement because it's not something that I do in one line.
No, I'm asking say, collision detection. You simply write that if the collision is between a point and the Pac-Man is 2/1, can it be a part of that while at the same time we are having collision with running some other algorithm?
Yeah, in the specification that I am going to show with you later, calculate the score is going to be a sub requirement of the collision because calculate the score is going to be complex enough to be another requirement, but it's going to be very, very connected with collision. Collision is the first thing that impacts the score, but there are going to be other things like the fruits that you mentioned that we haven't talked about it, and it's going to be there related. And the condition, the algorithm is going to be kind of not small. So it's going to be a requirement, specifically a sub requirement of collision. Yes.
So, for example, there are two requirements in the Pac-Man game. One collision detection.
Mhm.
The other one is how long the Pac-Man lasts on the board. So, and both the things have scoring as common activity.
Mhm.
So, we consider scoring as activity of those requirements.
Is it small or not? My consideration was so far collision, one requirement, score, another requirement. These two are going to be very, very connected. So I have these two. The time that we are going to take to redraw the Pac-Man or to whatever is going to be used one activity in any of these two, probably most in this one. Something that I need to share with you, something that you need to be aware. What we are doing is kind of programming. What we are doing is this idea of there are more than one way to represent things. There are more than one way to connect these requirements. If I ask you for the requirements of the Pac-Man, and I am going to do it in some point, maybe here you are going to give me 6. Maybe here you are going to give me 7 or 5. Those two scenarios is like asking you to implement a program and you give me 100 lines of code, and here you give me 75 lines of code or 120. These two are options and are going to be okay. But it's not going to happen that you give me 100 lines and here you give me 1,000 lines. It's not going to happen that you give me 7 requirements and here we have 100 requirements. There are several options. You are thinking about them, several options. I am telling you, I agree with that one or with that one. I could be doing something different than that one. As far as you can justify your selection with invest, as far as I can explain or I can ask you, okay, you consider the score one requirement. Tell me, explain me the activities inside of your score calculation requirement. And if you can give me the activities, and then you're going to start talking about all these if conditions. Okay, you are thinking about something that you call calculate the score, but is several activities, is your requirement. You are using as a title something that for me maybe is one activity or there is one activity, but this is correct. If you give me as a requirement something that when you explain it to me or to someone else is just one line in an algorithm, then we're going to have issues because it's like, guys, one line activity, no requirement, too small. So that is the point. You do not need to think in the same way that I think. You do not need to program in the same way that your instructor of programming program, but you need to be able to justify your answers.
So is a requirement something that must be implemented that is part of like the whole concept but cannot be implemented in alternative versions?
Connecting implementation with requirements. A requirement is something that one developer in the team is going to be responsible to do in one period of time. One period of time, usually 1 week. If you have worked with this idea of Agile, and you remember this idea of your product backlog, and you remember this idea of, I am a developer, what I am going to do in the next sprint, what I am going to do in the next week. What you are going to do is implement requirements. One or more services, one or more functionalities, one or more things. That is what you have as a requirement. An activity The activities are the things that you're going to implement as part of the requirement, but that you're going to finish like today, tomorrow. It's the thing that you're going to be able to do in 1 hour. It's a condition, it's an instruction, it's calling a method, activity, requirement. Good? Again, I am just doing oversimplification of implementation and requirement things. It's not just like so simple. We need to review that connection with details. But so far, at this point, instruction, activity, requirement, something that you work for at least a couple of days. Good? Okay, so moving forward. Can you think about requirements for Canvas? Can you think about requirements for my ASU? Can you think about requirements for Facebook? If I ask you to implement Facebook for, I don't know, the application for your phone to access Facebook, think about them. Review with your friends. Maybe next lecture I ask you for them, or maybe it's part of your homework. You can use it in your homework. I am asking you to think about it in the same way that we discussed during the lecture. Good? Don't worry, we're going to continue with more examples. Right now, I want you to give you time to think about it. Next, I want you to give you time also to think about the others, the non-functional. I put this picture here. Non-functional. Negotiable, answering the question in the chat. Remember, negotiable is something that is clear, something that is not ambiguous. Anything that is ambiguous is not negotiable. So the examples for not negotiable is anything that is not clear for everyone in the team. I am going to give you examples in the next lecture. I have some slides for test yourselves. So there are going to be examples like that. Non-functional. I put this picture because I want you to remember this. If you are my team, when we finish with the functional requirements, like we finish with the Pacman, what I am going to do is, okay, functional requirement number 1, create the maze. I am going to take that and I am going to say, you are responsible for creating the maze. Moving the Pacman, you are responsible for moving the Pacman. Moving the ghost, you are responsible for moving the ghost. I am going to give these requirements that are functional to one people or a sub-team in my team, whatever I have, right? I have a lot of people here. Maybe I create sub-teams, the maze, the Pacman, the ghost. In some point, we're going to put things together, integration. But each requirement can be done by an independent group of developers. Remember, independency for requirements is about, can I ask a group of developers, of one developer, to do this? And can that developer or that group of developers work without being in contact with others? The Pacman, the ghost, can you work in moving the Pacman without having the ghost? Or can you work in moving the ghost without having the Pacman? Or can you work in drawing the maze without having the Pacman or the ghost? And hopefully you agree with me. Yes, we can, right? I mean, I can do the ghost. Yeah, and you can draw a circle there that is moving, and that is the Pacman, but you can test your ghost. Or you can have your Pacman moving around without ghost, or your maze. Those are independent. Yeah, they are going to be together in some point, but they are independent. The non-functional requirements. If you are my team, the functional is something that I can give to one of you or a group of you. But the non-functional is something that I am going to put here in the whiteboard. A non-functional requirement is not something for one developer or one subgroup of developers. It's something that is going to be responsibility of everyone in the team. That is another way to identify them. If something cannot be done or cannot achieve just with one subgroup of persons, if something should be aware for everyone in the team, that is kind of something that is pointing out to the non-functional. The example before here about the Pacman for the web. That is something that my team doing the labyrinth, the maze, or moving the Pac-Man, or doing the ghost, all of them should be aware. We are moving forward to do something for the web. It is not functional. On the suggestion is that it's not functional because in this picture is something that I need to share with everyone, and everyone needs to be aware. More in detail, when we talk about these non-functionals, there are two things that are not functional. If you have a requirement, and again, the red letters, if you have a requirement and that requirement is all about quality, quality imply the adjectives that I mentioned before, or is about a limitation, something that the system should do or should not do, should allow or do not allow. Those are the two things that can be non-functional requirements, nothing else. Did you notice? Functional, service, reaction, or behavior. Non-functional, qualities or constraints. That's it. Those are the 5 categories for things that the customer can ask you to do. Your work, put whatever I told you as a customer in one of those 5 categories, and then you know if I am talking about functional or non-functional ideas. Good? Okay, professor, examples. Yeah, examples. This is something that you can review later. But when we talk about constraints, when we talk about quality, any constraint or any quality-related sentence is going to fit one of these boxes. We're going to go back to this one later, but anything that is non-functional is going to fit one of those categories, one of those boxes in the tree. Examples. Anything that talk about speed, size, easy to use, reliability, robustness, portability. Any sentence that talk about those ideas, those are qualities of the software, and they are going to be non-functional requirements. Now, tricky part, remember, they are requirements, but only if they fit the invest principles. So yes, if I ask you, the system should be fast, an adjective, therefore quality, therefore seems to be non-functional. But before telling me that is not functional, you need to review the invest. And something that happened with should be fast is you're going to identify testing. What I am going to do to test this. Negotiable. We understand the same about fast, the customer and myself. And you're going to identify like, no, problems. Let's change the sentence. The system should load in less than some seconds, or any event that the user creates, the response should be there in this particular amount of time, or the screen refresh should be as fast as 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. Put a number. It's talking about speed. It's going to be non-functional, but you need to review the invest. You need to put the numbers for the testing, the estimation, and also negotiable. You need to avoid the confusion. Clear? Any of this, some ideas of what kind of number you need to ask. You know what? I would like you to develop a system that is similar to Canvas. But you know what? Something that I want you to do is that system that you are going to develop is going to replace Canvas, and that system is never going to fail. That is my first requirement for you. Do Canvas, but no failures, because Canvas fails every single week. It's a requirement, no failures. With Canvas, a system like Canvas, but without failures. I am giving you a requirement, yes or no? I am giving you something that I need, something that I want. It's not a requirement. Your homework, your work, help me to translate that statement to a requirement. What can you do about it? Okay, what you need is a system similar to Canvas. Good. But what do you mean about this never fail? Help me to understand your idea of never fail. Help me to understand your idea of the system should be reliable. What?
So I also have a misunderstanding in terms of what that like what would we consider a specific quality? Is it user specified or is it like research driven?
The user, always the user.
Have 100% reliability, considered it possible, and as a result, would not be.
Okay, very good point. We're talking about reliability, right? So 100% is not possible is something that you need to explain to your customer. Now, what is possible? Because your work is to tell me, okay, I cannot do that, but the best case scenario, what I can do is I can guarantee that I am going to create a system and the number of failures that you are going to have is 1 failure per month, 1 failure per year, something like that. Can you measure that? The system is working, and we're going to measure how many times the system failed. Is functional or not functional? Why is not functional? Because starting for this, it's going to be a requirement that is going to be here in the blackboard, in the whiteboard, because the developers are going to be involved. But also, there are going to be people in the IT department that are going to be involved. So at least I have these 2 teams, and both need to work together to achieve that non-functional requirement. And I move down my reliability to something crazy, like work always, to something more specific. Clear? Okay, guys, I stop here. See you next lecture, guys. Thank you.